don't remember any of these things necessarily specifically, but I remember the feeling of all of them. I was always very sensitive. Very. And this is why this sensitivity, oversensitivity, some would say, was directly connected to anger repression. And even when I did the video Repression of the Empath, which got a lot of views because people, I think, can resonate with that, I was still in the last layers of repression, of anger. And so I couldn't talk about it completely personally yet because I couldn't see it all. The extent to which my sensitivity came from was, I don't know how you want to say that, is directly linked to the repression of anger. The only way I can show you is by telling you, it's like how stories become important again in the embodiment process once you're not identified with them, because they paint the picture of what really happened emotionally. You see, with our trauma. So, let's see if I can paint this picture. I just remember being easily hurt. Very easily hurt from a very early age. But I could feel that. My dad used to sit down next to me and cry. And if he was hurt by mom, he would tell me that. So I never thought, though, that hurt was something bad. It was scary, but my dad wasn't modeling that it's a bad emotion at all. And I just didn't learn it, that it was a bad one. And so my sensitivity and the feelings of hurt that I would feel, that in itself wasn't an issue. In and of itself, I think it was my inability to get angry that created the problem, because I was just taking all that in. But I didn't have this other resource online, which is to say, no, stop, no. And that part of me was offline. So I spent a lifetime of disconnecting from people, life, human relationship, groups, And a lot of it, I said, was because I'm an empath, or I'm really sensitive. But that's true. The truth of it is that I was repressing anger. Had I had that resource online, I could have stayed connected in different ways to people and groups. But without that resource online, I just got hurt too easily. And when you get hurt easily and you can't get angry, then hiding and just disconnecting is the way, or at least was for me. And so I just, that's why I say I slid right into spirituality. It's like I came in the back door as an anger repressor and slid right in with a lot of other anger repressors who were also sensitive. And yet I didn't understand that this is a shelter for us. I didn't see that part of it because this felt like a good place to be. Spirituality and non-duality, it's like a really good place to be for someone like me who prefers the quietness and doesn't really want to be around people that much. And meditation is nice. Inquiry is, because I don't have to really be vulnerable in any way with anyone. Well, that was my operating system, so you can imagine how KI has disrupted that for me. And by the way, if this video just stops, it's because if I start doing a video and my phone doesn't have enough charge, I don't stop it if it feels like this video is something that I want, or this audio is something that I want you to hear. So if I just go away, it just means my battery died. Can anybody relate to that? That if you don't have the resource of anger online to protect yourself or to fight back or say anything, say something, that you just limited options as in terms of trauma response. Flee, freeze. I think I just got really comfortable in the fleeing and the freezing around anger. So comfortable that when I slid into the back door of spirituality, I didn't really know that that was there, that trauma response, because a lot of you guys were doing the same thing of, we were all kind of getting away from the angry, crazy people in the world, or a lot of us took refuge here as a shelter, is what I say. And there's nothing really wrong with that, because it's nice to have a place to go where at least people, process or are open to awakening, those kinds of things. But I do think it's a trauma shelter, and I slid right into it and became a teacher, in part because I had a genuine realization, and the other part is because it's the perfect thing to become if you bury anger. And that's why so many of those monks that they're studying and others have these issues. This is a very systemic issue. It's not just Scott Killaby. This is why I criticize the other teachers, because we're not talking about it yet. One day it'll be studied and people will have to talk about it, but it's in the closet right now, basically. In spirituality. And that's the most honest and vulnerable I can be, is that I was just very easily hurt and then afraid of hurt going forward. And so I stored that fear of hurt and then anger repression in my body, and it produced the suffering that kept me safe my whole life, including becoming a teacher. That kept me safe. Including becoming an attorney that fought the good fight against those who discriminated. See, I've been fighting the good fight my whole life. And for what? From what? From anger repression. Because I couldn't get angry in those situations. I had to fight the good fight in another way. I had to channel my anger into, as you can see, spirituality. But the problem with that is that it doesn't get dealt with quite often when we come here. And you could say we're channeling it, but we're avoiding it. I'm helping people who are suffering, just like I was suffering, but I'm not getting to the root of it in myself or others. For a long time. That weighs on you if you have any sort of self-reflection. Unless you just compartmentalize that too. I think some teachers do that. And then come out with kind of flippant responses about trauma. But if we can just forget trauma and just talk about what it really means and what it is to be human, I bet that you can find that in yourself, that even if it's really unconscious at this point and buried with the repression, you would find a deep fear of being hurt or rejected or seen. And then that's governing everything. But there's a repression closely associated with it in the body, a repression of certain emotions and traits. All buried. And you wouldn't see this stuff arising to awareness. This is the stuff that creates the stuff that arises to awareness. So you can see, as my life has come to this place where, God, this is really important, as I've said recently, that you see my anger and that I've shown you my femininity, and it's still here. I'm sitting in a way right now that you'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, you've opened to that. But I have to be myself here now. Look at the life that I've lived. I'm tired. I'm tired of lying. So you're going to have to see the anger from time to time. Because I want to be a whole human being. I don't want to just be something that people look up to or shadow positive or negative things on just from their own trauma. I want to show up as transparently as I can. If I'm still unconscious, I can't share about those things. I'm only human. And I think that the new conversation in spirituality is not people professing to be done, but people being open, even helpers, so that we can see the codependency that's getting created through trauma bonding in spirituality. We're looking for mom and dad. We're in pain. We're hurt. We're afraid and we're angry. We're storing it in our bodies. We're suffering. And we often look to the teachers and others to be that guiding light. But if that person is burying stuff too, there's a reason to speak up about that, actually, if you see what's going on. See, but so many people are in anger repression that they can't get angry about the very bypass that they're buying into every day. Their bodies won't let them. And then when I get angry, of course, it triggers people, but I'm going to keep just showing up however feels right for me, because I spent so many years lying about these kinds of things. And maybe now you can see how important it is for anger to come online. I wasn't missing anything. I wasn't deficient. There was no, the sense of separation or deficiency was coming from these parts of myself that were offline. So I couldn't be myself. Therefore, it was easier to leave or cut and run or disconnect from people, or just be interested in awareness, but not embodiment, or, all the stuff that comes with that. But if you can see my full profile, is that I've already had hurt and sadness online. I've just been processing that for years. Ever since my dad set me down at age 7 and cried, I learned that sadness is here and that's okay, and hurt. But I didn't have my anger. Dad never modeled that. I became an anger repressor to get love in my family. I had no teacher sat me down and said, hey, you've buried anger. So I followed them, thinking they might lead me to wherever I needed to go. But there was a bypass. And now that I've recognized that, do I stay quiet so that other people fall into that bypass? Or do I speak up? I speak up. You don't have to come here, but go somewhere to deal with the trauma. That's what I say. And it's part of the awakening process. Because your suffering is kept, the score for your suffering is kept in the body. I would say, and I've said it before, that it's love is why I do this. But it's a different kind of love than I ever thought would be. Because first and foremost, I have to love myself. Not the separate self, but all aspects of me have to be allowed. Before I ever start even thinking that I can love somebody else. I mean, if I can't get angry at you, I can't love you. I'm going to lie to you and get your love. So if I get angry at you, you might leave. That's just part of it. I never had that resource online. I could never say these things if I needed to say those things growing up. I always ran. I always hid. I don't want to run and hide anymore. So you're going to see my anger from time to time. Just like I hope I see yours from time to time. A couple more things here. It's complex. We anger repressors. Do we just have to deal with some buried hurt under all the anger? Not necessarily. You see, I was so eager to process hurt and sadness as a teacher. My somatic work that I did 12 years ago was all about victim consciousness and unlovability and deep hurt and woundedness. That's what my whole teaching was about for many years. If you guys remember, you guys who are coming now, you're seeing the repression work. You didn't see the work around the stuff that arises and all that. But that's where I was. And I could show vulnerability in relationship. I used it to manipulate people. I've even used sadness to manipulate people because I can feel and express it. I would manipulate them by basically holding anger back and not sharing my true feelings, wanting them to do something or show up a certain way, but not willing to actually express it in anger. And so I would use that, different shades or emotions to manipulate. I'm not willing to do that anymore. I just want to be real. Some people will find deep hurt and sadness under their anger, especially if you didn't spend 10 years as a teacher processing it publicly. Like telling people, I've got an unlovable story. That's how this all started. This trauma work started there with me, if you'll remember. But we got to go deeper than the stuff that arises. We got to go deeper than those tears that come up for us anger repressors, because we can't open to the anger. We got to go deeper than just calling ourselves empaths or highly sensitive people, which is a safe identity that we may be using to avoid what we buried. It seems to me that all humans are pretty sensitive, maybe some others more than others, but I think it's how we deal with our emotions that is the determining factor for the health of every human. It's not that we come predisposed to suffer because we're sensitive. Or maybe we do, but there's a way out of it, is what I want to say. The sensitivity is very self-protective. It was for me. Look at it for you. Because it can easily get triggered, but you won't share anger if you're an anger repressor. That's the trigger. If you could just say, I'm angry at the person, or share it yourself, you wouldn't hold on to the trigger, and you wouldn't be disconnecting from as many people as you may be disconnecting from. Some people we have to disconnect from. It just doesn't work. But when you have all your resources online, you don't have to live a life of separation and disconnection in the same way. When you have all your resources online, and that includes the anger, and that includes the hurt, the sadness, whatever that is. You can't even know anybody. I couldn't know anybody until I did the repression work. You can't. It's so self-protective. Can't know yourself. The sensitivity was a big shield for me. I would use it in different ways to tell stories to myself and to other people that justify why I didn't want to be with them, why I didn't want to stay here. The stories were always false, because what was true is I couldn't feel and express anger. That was true. I couldn't. And I would tell stories that would hide that from me and hide it from them. And part of the story is I'm an empath, or I'm sensitive, or I need to go away now. I've really enjoyed you guys' company, but I have to go. You know, that thing that we do. There's nothing wrong with it. We're staying safe. But can you imagine how your life would be so much bigger if you didn't have to live like that? Can you imagine just where I can just get angry at somebody and say, hey, that's how I really feel, and now you know it, but I don't want to leave you. If you're willing to stay here, let's stay. That's a completely different thing. I've never experienced it before until this work. I've been angry so many times with my partner, and he's still here. I mean, not multiple times, but enough coming out of anger repression. You would expect that, right? I don't think that the atmosphere that exists right now in spirituality is conducive to healing trauma the way it exists, but I'd like to help create something. And I'm going to start by showing you my anger and telling you why I show up the way I do, because you wouldn't know unless I express it. See, all my life, the reason I didn't connect with all of you is because I was afraid of my anger. That's why I really didn't connect with all of you, or whoever you are. That's the reason, was the buried anger. I don't have that. I want to connect with you, but when I do, I'm going to be real with you. So there's no connection in the falseness. So if I can't get angry at you or share what's going on, if that comes up for me, then we can't really have a real relationship, and you know that. And it's difficult when you're a teacher, you know. I've had to look at my close relationships, as you can imagine, and see, how did my anger, repression, and empath consciousness create this environment. Or what environment am I in now? What are these relationships? And I came to find out that I trauma bond with quite a few people, actually. Trauma bonded. In other words, there were people around me that couldn't feel and express their true emotions. And when I did, a couple of them left, but most of them stayed around. And the relationships got deeper. And that had to happen for those relationships to get deeper. We had to see each other for that to be something more than a teacher-student relationship. It had to be authentic. We had to show ourselves to each other in some way, and that includes anger. In some way, we've had to see it. In these relationships, even with people that are colleagues, I mean, like not, of course, my friends and stuff like that, Chester, but I'm really talking about these relationships, like in spirituality. They've been changed, and I'm all the, richer for it. Like my life is better. Much better, actually. That's why I want to create this space, and I'll just let you go here soon, but that's what I'm interested in 2024. I know that certain people just listening to me, there's a new energy here. It's about the we space. And what it is if I can't share my authentic feelings with you, I can't help you. That's the we space. So in other words, if there's a teacher or helper or a therapist who's harboring something or who cannot express something, that person cannot model or help another person to get free of their trauma. That's what I've learned. And so that's why I have to show up, in all these ways with all these colors now, because you've got to see all of me for it to feel safe for you to be all of you. If I'm going to help you, or if any of us are going to help you here in this work. And I think what we all need to do is to start talking about our landscape, our emotional landscape, is that I was always easily hurt as a kid, could easily feel and even express sadness and hurt, but I couldn't express anger. And so anytime that would have come up, I would have been afraid of it, and I would have left in some way. Even if I was right there with you, I still would have disconnected. And that's not happening anymore. But for that not to happen, we have to warm up to actually who we are, each of us, and let that be seen. Or we're just going to stay frozen with each other. Like we can't look at each other and be shocked when another person is angry. I mean, we can, but we have to do that work, or we're never going to really know each other. Hurt too, sadness too, and fear. If you know another way, you tell me. You put up your YouTube channel and you say the other way, and I'll either agree with you or disagree with you. But to me, the only way out is through. That's just like simple. But it means all the way through the stuff that we buried. That's the stuff I never wanted to deal with. That's the stuff I would have rather have been an empath suffering. I would have rather called myself a really highly sensitive whatever than ever deal with that buried stuff. So I'm just saying, to what degree are these identities safe for you? And do you know how to look to see if they're driven by anger or other repression? Because what I'd like to see going forward is some of the empaths or the people who used to disconnect, they're staying and they're getting angry. Or they're watching other people get angry and they're able to hold it all. And they're not having to disconnect. And they're seeing that their sensitivity is actually helping them love more deeply. First themselves and then others. That's what our sensitivity is here for. So we can truly feel and allow it all and not hide from it anymore, including the anger. There's a vulnerability in anger repression. There's a vulnerability that we receive by doing anger repression work because we have to go into the fear of anger. It's a fear. Just like any fear. That's what brings us to more vulnerability. But we have to remember that when we do that work, anger is then online. We don't get to do it and then divorce ourselves from that emotion that we've buried. We have to welcome it first. And you'll see what it's like because you make room for all of you. And for a while, you have to really make room for this beast of anger, if that's your thing, or sadness, because you've hidden it so much. You're going to make it conscious more and more and more so that you see its emptiness. But what happens then is you can't go around the earth pretending anymore. I can't. I'm not going to pretend that I don't have anger or that I don't have other emotions, or if I do, I do. That's what it means to be awake, to see those. When those things are ready to fall away, they will. And so much has fallen away for me, but you know that you can't make things go away. So the answer is to make them conscious fully. Thank you.